Welcome to Understanding the Conservative Perspective, hosted by CCL's Braver Angels Action Team. I am very pleased that CCL is offering a session like this as part of our national conference, because understanding each other better in this country is so very badly needed. So thanks to all of you for making time for it today, and thank you to the team that you are going to meet today. You'll learn more about Braver Angels as the program proceeds. I just want to say at the outset that the partnership between Citizens Climate Lobby and Braver Angels surely was meant to be and is an utter delight. I'm going to turn this over to Bruce Moreland in just a moment to take it from here. Bruce is a longtime CCL member and one of the founding members of CCL's Conservative Caucus. He's put countless hours into both Citizens Climate Lobby and Braver Angels, and that's a very good thing for all of us. I'll be back after the panel to offer a few more thoughts on this work. And so, Bruce, let's keep going.
All right, thank you for that great introduction, Madeline. One of the things that came out of the 2016 and continued into the 2020 election was a better understanding of how our political affiliations drive our discussions and our reasoning. And it turns out that what we believe is much more a function of what our peers believe than it is of our rational selves. One consequence of the dynamic is that if we talk only to like-minded individuals, we become more extreme in our language and in our ideas. And CCL's style of bipartisanship really takes a conscious effort to maintain. Braver Angels formed in response to this supercharged partisanship back in 2017. And they are a nationwide citizen initiative to counteract political polarization and restore the fraying social fabric in American society. Beth Mallow and I saw Braver Angels as a source of important ideas and skills, and we helped found the Braver Angels Action Team to bring those skills from Braver Angels into Citizens Climate Lobby. So why are we focusing on conservatives? Well, CCL, bipartisanship is in our DNA, but it takes a conscious effort to avoid the sorts of polarizing that we might see in a largely one-side organization. The conservatives are a minority in the group and a loud minority, but nonetheless. CCL has provided great support through the Conservative Caucus, and that has given conservatives in CCL the extra support that it can take to function. It's like an affinity group. And Beth is going to put a link for the Conservative Caucus in the chat. So what are our desired outcomes today? We want you to see the excitement of respectful conversations. It can be very fun when I go to my coffee groups, it's for the purpose of talking politics, and we do it in a healthy way. And we're hoping that you'll see some really interesting ideas here. We want you to find common ground, and we want you to get some new perspectives on diversity of views in the search for our expanded solutions. Please use the Q&A to post questions for the panel. Beth and I will be looking in there and forwarding questions to the panel when we get to that part of the program. Now, let me introduce our moderator, Dr. Bill Dougherty. He is a co-founder of Braver Angels. He is a professor in the Department of Family Social Science in the College of Education and Human Development at the University of Minnesota. His areas of interest include democratic community building with families, citizen healthcare, marriage, fatherhood, families dealing with chronic illnesses, and marriage and couples therapy. And I can't think of a better set of skills to bring into our discussions. So with that, Dr. Doherty.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. So happy to be with you all for, I think, what will be an exciting panel. I'm going to introduce them, and then I'm going to describe what the process will be. Steve Saltwick is a biopsychologist and Braver Angel CCL volunteer who co-founded the Braver Angels Alliance in Central Texas in 2018, and currently co-chairs field operations for Braver Angels. And field operations catalyzes local alliances across all 50 states. Elizabeth Fenner is CCL State Coordinator for California, a teacher and researcher who is passionate about respecting all voices. She has worked in and volunteered with schools, libraries, nonprofit organizations, and community groups. And then Ron McFarland is a Braver Angels volunteer in Ames, Iowa, where he serves as a church, hospice, and athletic volunteer. Ron played All-American at Big 8 conference football and is a retired K-12 teacher and football, wrestling, and track coach. Jacob Abel is spokesperson for Republican.org and a former conservative outreach fellow with CCL. He has hosted workshops on how to speak with Republicans about climate change and appeared on news outlets such as BBC, Vice News, and now this. So that's our panel. And here's the process we're going to use. There will be two questions. The first one is adapted from a question we have used in Brave Angels workshops. It's a life experiences question. And each person is going to have 4 minutes, just themselves, to answer the question. And then we'll have a question more specifically about conservative perspectives on public policy and climate change. So here's the first question, and we'll be starting with Steve. What life experiences have led you to a conservative perspective on public policy and the public good? Now, I'll repeat it again, and everyone will have 4 minutes to answer this question, and then we'll have some panel discussion. Again, the question: what life experiences have led you to a conservative perspective on public policy and the public good? Take it away, Steve.
Well, thanks, Bill. And thanks for using the C word. I consider myself a proud conservative. Now, I vote Republican because of policy choices most of the time, but I think of myself as a conservative at the root meaning of the word, because I want to conserve the things that are really good in America, including conserving our environment and our land and the stewardship of the planet. So I say that fully realizing the kind of work we have left to do, but I think we don't want to forget all the good that we have. Now, I came here through a kind of circuitous route, so I thought I'd share two experiences in my life. When I was young, I was a nerd, and so I remember bugging my mother to always go watch her vote or something like that, because back then voting machines were like these huge monstrosities with a curtain, and you pull all these levers, and there was a big thing that you pulled to vote. I mean, it was awesome. I mean, for a nerd, this was really good. But I never could get my mother to explain how she decided to vote, so it was just not that important to me. I continued on being a nerd, and I went into the neuroscience program as a PhD student in University of Texas. And that was great, published in Science, but nobody was getting jobs. So since I could do computers, I went and did computers around the world. And because of that, I have seen personally the failures of grand transformations out there on the planet. So East Germany, Venezuela, Cambodia. And it made me realize that the US system really has core things that are the best, of the available choices. I would argue our economic system, our constitutional protection of rights, things like that. But I acknowledge there's issues, and I acknowledge we have to work on them. But my point of being a conservative, conserving these things, save what's best, and then incrementally improve from there, applies to all. And I value the environment. I want to be gentle with the earth. I support CCL strongly, but with a system that allows humans to thrive. And I believe all conservatives are like that at core. So I believe you can connect to conservatives using common values like that as a foundation for common ground, and then you build out from there. The second thing I want to share is that, I found people very different from me can still share these values on preserving the land. My in-laws had a farm in East Texas. They ran some cattle on it. We ran short of hay one day, so I had to go to the next farm and work with the farmer and his son to throw hay up on a flatbed truck. Now, these dudes were about as different from a PhD student in Austin, Texas as you could get. But after working hard on checking up bales on this flatbed truck, and let me tell you, that was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Those dudes are heavy, right? We connected on stewardship of the land. So I connected on values. Now, I needed to work hard with them, and I needed to listen. So, and when I say listen, I mean don't listen. I didn't listen to reload and contest everything they said. I listened to understand and with curiosity. But I was amazed at the common ground you could find. So just to close, Bill, right? I mean, net for the people in the audience who are trying to connect to perhaps people kind of different from themselves, I suggest connecting on values first. Listen first. You can be amazed, you will be amazed, I think, at the common ground you'll find and what you can build on and expand from there.
All right. Okay, thanks, Steve. So Elizabeth, tell us about what life experiences have influenced you as a conservative.
Thanks, Bill. And I want to shout out to Bruce Moreland. Thanks for inviting me to this panel. I was a little surprised because I'm a conservative in Los Angeles who's sort of hidden in plain sight for a long time. And in fact, I have friends who say, "No, Elizabeth, you're not conservative." And I'm like, no, actually, no, I am. And so I feel a little outed, but I'm happy. And then also to Beth Mallow for amazing management of this group and prep. All right, I have a lot to say. People who know me know I have opinions, so I'll go fast. The birth of my political consciousness was when I was about 18. I didn't pay any attention to anything. I was just trying to get through school and have fun and make friends. When I went off to college, I did the same. I didn't pay attention to issues. I paid attention to people and relationships. And then a group that I knew, I was invited to a party. People were nice. We talked. It was fun. They invited me then to help put together a float for a parade. Okay, all right, sure. We stayed up all night. We did this float. The next day, it was like, well, we got to have somebody ride on the float. Would you like to ride on the float? Sure, I'll be in a parade, ride on the float. And as I did that, waving at the crowd, we were booed. We were booed on that float because it was the float for Ronald Reagan at UC Davis. And I was like, oh, wait, what? And then I started paying attention to issues. I started paying attention to politics, and that was the beginning of my education. But it was also, it highlighted this division and this lack of communication between folks. And so anyway, to move on, there are a couple of reasons why and how I'm conservative. And let's start with money. In my 20s, I made decisions. I was independent. I left Los Angeles. I got a job. I was quite poor. I was hurting, so I knew how to use a cabbage and potatoes. I was also too proud to ask my parents for help because I'd made my decisions sort of against their advice. And so in those 20s, living frugally, I learned a couple of very good life lessons. One is that the mindset of no one's coming to help you. You better not spend more than you have. So for me personally, having to figure that out, having to work through that, I consider that conservative. I was also proud and independent, but I think that the individual can really benefit from that perspective, and I still benefit from some of that perspective now. Second is parenthood. I'm saying any parent anywhere is going to be conservative because just about any parent is going to say there's a bedtime, and it's because I said so, and I want you to eat your dinner before you eat dessert, and I know things that you don't know, so you're just going to have to trust me. And on another level, and I feel like I'm going to trigger my audience, which is largely liberal, and I really thank you for hearing me out here. But any parent with 2 kids is going to cut the brownie evenly. They cut the brownie evenly, not because one person you don't cut it unevenly because somebody had a bad day, so they get a bigger piece. You don't cut it unevenly because somebody's bigger and the other's smaller. Or rather, you don't if you don't want to fight. If you don't want to build resentment between your 2 kids, you make sure that they feel evenly treated. And let's put that out there, that I think conservatives feel very strongly about even treatment, trying to be fair now. All right, I'll move on because I think I have to defend that. But the third thing is
move on a little quickly now because you're at your 4-minute mark.
Oh, thank you. The final thing is quiet self-sacrifice that I consider part of the ethos of conservatism. Now we have dads that went off to jobs that they didn't particularly want to do, but they were sacrificing for the greater good. We had moms that stayed home with their children when it wasn't popular, taking a hit career-wise, but for the sacrifice of what they believed that was the best benefit of their children. And we have soldiers that go off. Now, I don't think that these people want pity, and they certainly don't want support if it means dependence. They want respect, and they want an even playing field. And so these are values. Would you say everybody holds these? Absolutely. I think everybody has conservatives in them. Do I think that it's fully represented in our political party now, the Republican Party? I look for it. I keep looking for it. And thanks, Bill, for the extra time.
Okay, great. Thank you, Elizabeth. Ron, so what life experiences? Reading your bio there, you've had a few life experiences. It shaped you as a conservative.
Yes, I had many. I'm going to come from a different direction right now. First thing is, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. That was a hymn that was sung to me very early in my life by my mother. And my mother was very dear to me. Oh, the most wonderful thing in my life. And then a tragic thing happened. My sister and I had to go to an orphanage. Now, if you've ever been in an orphanage, it's not a nice place. I say that because government program, it shaped me. It gave me an understanding of what I did not want for other people like me. So we spent time in that orphanage, and it was awful for about a year and a half. We get out of there. My family get back together, father and mom. And the next experience that shaped me to be a conservative was my father always had a book in his hand. Very he read a lot. He made mistakes in the course, but he showed me an example to get knowledge. Now, along with my father, I had uncles in various areas. Boy, I tell you, I was a fly on the wall, listening to them, how they had dialogue, they had debate. A lot of times I didn't know if they were Democrat or Republican. But one thing I learned was the love of debating and having the dialogue. Some of them believed in the Constitution, some of them didn't. Some of them believed in free market, some of them didn't. The common thing was because of segregation, they thought the enemy was America. And they always pushed me to learn about my culture. And in that journey to learn about Black history, I discovered W.E. Du Bois. I discovered Carter G. Woodson. I discovered Booker T. Washington. I discovered all these Black intellectuals. Now, each one of them had a different perspective on America. And the most famous one that became my hero was Frederick Douglass. So when someone asks me, how does a Black man be a Republican? I say, Frederick Douglass. And you look at their face and they say, they either have this blank look because they don't know anything about it, or we have a dialogue, we have a discussion. And my father had an interesting quote at the end of his discussion. He usually had it at this place where they shot pool. He said, I see you in the pool room. And if you've ever been in around the Black community, it's three places they had discussions: the pool room, the barbershop, and the church. And so I would sit there as a little kid and I would just absorb their knowledge. And they would always present it in a truthful, but sometimes not a narrative that was really good. Sometimes it was harsh. Sometimes it taught me so much. In the first place, I taught about the big lie, propaganda, and things of that nature. And it developed me. And they always preach about hard work. Don't rely on the government. Now, you see where I'm going? Tenets of a conservative party: free market, They didn't want a handout. Now, of course, we had a few uncles that said, "No, give me that free money." I don't want to stand in line. Give
So
me all.
run about 30 more seconds if it's okay.
Okay, then. So anyway, that is the reason why I'll tell you a quote by Frederick Douglass. I am a Republican, a black dyed-in-wool Republican, and I'll never intend to belong to any other party than the party of freedom and progress. That's why I'm a Republican.
Okay, thank you, Ron. And so, Jacob, your response to this question.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everyone, for being here and for having me again. It's great to be back with Citizens Climate Lobby. When thinking about this question, I really came up with 4 distinct sort of life experiences that really have shaped me as becoming a conservative. The first one was, since I can remember, I've always loved current events. History was really my first true love. So Lincoln, Washington, Adams, Reagan, watching their speeches, listening to what they wrote. Those 2 things really impacted me moving forward into my life and gave me a strong basic conservatism. The second one was, and I've talked about this with my CCL family before, it's growing up during the 2008 recession. My family was heavily in the construction industry, so we were heavily impacted by the recession. Remember having to pay with gas, with the change in your cup holder in your car. You weren't really even sure if you're going to make it home because you didn't know if you had money for gas. So that really taught me to value a dollar, and really hard work, seeing my dad having to work from 7 a.m. to 3 a.m. For 4, 5, 6 days in a row just to get by. So those 2 things really, really shaped me in, how to value a dollar, the value of hard work, financial independence, and really being able to rely on yourself to take care of your family and, push yourself into a better tomorrow. My third, I'm a recent graduate from Seton Hall University. And while I was at Seton Hall, I was heavily involved in student government. And I highly recommend, if anyone can do this, is being able to represent other people and their views and fight for those views. So I was a representative of my school, the School of Diplomacy, which was a very diverse school in thought, race, gender, everything. So when you're representative of other people, you do, to a certain extent, have to put your own beliefs aside and fight for what they believe in. So I couldn't just go into our student government meetings and pound the table with my own conservative values, because I had to fight for what the people I was representing who voted for me, for what they wanted. From there, it really taught me to work with other people, listen to what they are passionate about, and try and find common ground where we can, and not focus so much on what we oppose and what we differ on, because we're really not going to get anywhere if we do that. We need to focus on what we have common ground on and what we can achieve. And I had mostly liberal friends at Seton Hall. I was usually one of the few Republicans in the room, and people would often call me a different kind of Republican, whatever that really means. I think it was just because I was willing to engage with them, and I would tell them, I'm not a different kind of Republican. If you actually go talk to Republicans, we share the same values, we fight for the same things. So it's just important to reach across the aisle. And in my final year in student government, I was fortunate enough to be elected Senate Speaker, which leads a group of 30 elected representatives from different schools across the university. And I kind of proud to say this, actually. I had several card-carrying Democratic socialists who voted me to lead them when they knew I was a Republican, because they believe in me that much. And I had worked with them, gotten lunch with them, spent hours with them just to understand their perspective and see where we could move forward. So that was one thing I was definitely proud of. And the fourth is actually currently what I'm doing. I'm not in DC like my little name says. I'm actually in Concord, North Carolina. And I'm currently the chairman for the Cabarrus County Young Republicans. So we're just a group of young Republicans working to elect Republicans, change policy, and things of that sort. And so I've been very surprised in my about 5 months doing this now, of learning different perspectives from young people. There's a very diverse group of thought in the Republican Party. It's not often what you see portrayed in the news, and it gives me a lot of hope because all of us are very passionate about dealing with climate change and several other issues. So dealing with these various things and these 4 experiences have definitely helped shape me as a conservative and really based me in Republican and conservative thought. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. All right. We should change you to North Carolina, not Washington, D.C. here, huh? Yeah, okay. So if we could, we'll have the panel all on the screen coming back here for a few minutes, really 8 minutes or so, just to alert us all to time. for any reflections that any of you have about what you heard from one another, any themes you heard in this part of the conversation, any differences, just any reflections you have as you listen to each other. So anybody who would like to just jump in and start there would be great.
Well, one thing I heard, Bill, was just how the power of listening, even amongst different people, things like that, can lead to, kind of surprising discovery of common ground. I mean, especially on values. I guess that's my main thing. Sometimes the words we use are very different. And if you listen for the values underneath those words, right, it's surprising, how close we are sometimes. And so that struck me, I think, in the conversation.
What stood out for me was, again, the values and the impressions early on in life, how it tends to shape you, but you don't stay right there in those places, and how those impressions say, okay, this is how this family or this person experiences are, but there's another growth. There's another mindset as we get older. And so that resonated to me very loud, with Steve talking about early on the farm, and then Jacob said, listing all the college experiences and all this. And then it, again, I agree with the commonality of togetherness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jacob, you want to go next?
Absolutely. I think one thing I noticed was the common vein of sort of fiscal conservatism, valuing a dollar, how our own life struggles have certainly influenced that, and how we know to be responsible and live within our means.
Mm-hmm. Elizabeth, your reflections and what you heard.
I'll add that I love the beauty here that I think everybody expressed, which is the beauty of multi viewpoints and the sharing, the confident sharing of opinions. What I think is happening, at least in Los Angeles, and I went to a Republican get-together, and I sort of expected 5 people to show up, and 60 people showed up. And there were all different kinds of people, and lots of young people. But what everybody here has described, and I especially like how Ron and Jacob were describing an environment where people are confident in groups, feel confident to speak their values, speak their truths, and have it heard and incorporated and accepted. And that doesn't happen in some liberal groups. I would say that some groups have conservatives and Republicans hiding in plain sight who don't feel confident.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that, because one of the themes I heard was liberals in your world saying, "Gee, you're really a conservative? You're actually a Republican?" You want to comment on that? What does that tell you, that that's such a common? Hey, like you're a reasonable person. Gee, could you remind me again? You actually are a conservative?
Bill, okay, go ahead, Jay.
So I just said, Bill, I've had that multiple times in my life. We do these things in Braver Angels called one-on-one. So, typically a red conservative will talk with a blue liberal progressive. And, and it's almost like, number one, they've rarely talked to them, like that before. And then at the end, it's kind of like, wow, I didn't know that there were rational, conservatives around, or something like that, which is interesting, right? And yet in every one of those things, I would say we both had a really enjoyable conversation, of different views. We're not going to agree on the solutions, but we both discovered we were working for common values or a common goal to do something. And I think that's a very powerful thing. So,
yeah. Ryan, you wanted to get in on that one?
Yeah. Usually when I walk into the room, I'm like a fly. So I'm in disguise. I'm Batman, so to speak. And often when people find out that I'm Republican, and they go, "How does that work as being a person of color, a black man?" And I usually come up with some goofy comment, but I won't say that today. But after we have conversation, they go, "Are you sure you're Republican? Are you positive?" I was in conversation a few weeks ago with a professor, and he found out that he was from Venezuela. and he found out that I was a Republican. And at the end of the conversation, he said, "Man, you ought to run for politics. I would vote for you." But he was a Democrat, you know. So anyway, it's just interesting in perception versus reality. And I always end with them with the word vulnerability. I said, I learned a long time ago not to live with fear, but live with my vulnerability. And I'm going to share it with you. And it tends to work. Yeah.
Elizabeth, you were smiling and nodding as you listened to your colleagues here. And I'm thinking about how you started your presentation when you said you were outing yourself. So any comments about what reactions you hear from people about you being a conservative or Republican?
They said, no, you're not really. You're not really. You're just saying that. I'm like, okay, so like, okay, then that's what you think. But what I sometimes hear, and the thing that I think I'm best known for in CCL and elsewhere, is if I hear those little, and they're little, what liberals will call them microaggressions. But there'll be these little microaggressions against Republicans or conservatives. And as if they're all one type, that they're all Trump voters, that they're all lockstep, that they all stormed the Capitol. And so I like to do that. I like to stand up for those. And it's just like a little correction there. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. So Jacob, just have a minute or so left in this part. Anything else you'd like to add on this question, or anything else that we've been talking about here?
Sure. No, I really enjoy with the sort of different Republican comment, or you're a Republican, because you can, you're talking to people and you can really see their eyes open. They're like, oh my God, that all makes so much sense. It's really a good opportunity to win people over. And I've done these kind of talks a lot in regards to carbon pricing and, reaching out to more liberals, and you can really you can convince them to be on board with it by actually selling it from a conservative perspective, and they're like, I really agree with that. So it's really cool to have those conversations.
Yeah, well, that's a nice transition, Jacob, to our next question. We really wanted, I want to say to the audience, we wanted to have the panelists just talk about themselves, their backgrounds, their core conservative views, and then have the discussion about climate change and policy. So that's what we're going to do next. So the question is, what does a conservative perspective bring to our national deliberations about public policy and climate change? And I'll say it again. What does a conservative perspective bring to our national deliberations about public policy and climate change? And we're going to have Steve start off, and then we're just going to you can come in as you like after that. Steve, start us off.
Well, thanks, Bill. All right. So we've talked a lot about costs, and I do think a conservative perspective means that costs have always got to be part of the equation, right? And that's along a discussion of, well, are we trying for incremental change or radical transformation or whatever, but cost is always a factor. And I'd just like to say, at least from my perspective as a conservative, right? I mean, we're not trying to be a downer to the party here, right? I mean, we do support changing the situation so that we address, climate change and all of that, right? So we're not doing this to be a downer to everybody. We're doing it because to be successful, costs and implementation and how you factor in incremental change really need to be part of the discussion, because oftentimes it could be one of the most impactful part of the solutions. So that was one thing I think the perspective brings.
Okay, and as we continue our conversation, I'll remind folks that you can put questions in the Q&A. Please don't put them in the chat. Please put them in the Q&A. We've got a couple of folks who are curating the questions, and we're looking forward to those. So thanks for starting us off, Steve. So I would like to go next to offer some your perspectives on climate change from a conservative viewpoint.
Until a few weeks ago, I really didn't have a straightforward perspective. And then I started doing my research and start studying, and then being a little bit more pointed in that area. Climate change has always been polarizing to me. You either believe in catastrophic, it's going to happen yesterday, or you're a denier. You deny it. And it tends to put the Republicans in that end. And I have to come on board and say, I believe there's something happening. But to what degree? to the degree that we put trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in there, or do we take the perspective of studying the problem in depth with critique and then put our money in research? There's tons of different researchers. We have the platform set up in America in all our universities. All we need to do is find one, okay? And so that's where my mind is. I'm from free market, but I don't want to spend money just because we are a fast food driven society. We need the results right away. It's like what Einstein said, if I had an hour for a problem, I spend 55 minutes on the problem and 5 minutes on the solution. And we need to take that kind of mentality instead of all this fear, because all it does to me is somebody's trying to make some money. So, anyway.
Okay. So Elizabeth, why don't you get in on this one?
Okay, I find that I'm like trying to process the question, but I do have something to say, which is regarding policy and our climate policy in the Deutsche Bill. I particularly, from the get-go, love the equality about it. I love the even-handed dividend. And I'll tell you why. Los Angeles has income inequality is evident all over the place. When you go into the grocery store, income inequality. And that income inequality, I think, creates a wall between us and we can't talk. But and when we talk, I think both sides agree, both sides enjoy it. And so to the idea of two people standing each other in the grocery aisle and saying, did you get your $45 this month? I sure did. Did you get your $45? And they're completely different income levels, but they have this thing in common, which is they got it even. The second thing is, if I could say one message for the entire talk, which is for every lobby meeting for CCL, whether you're progressive or Republican, get a conservative in the room. Get a conservative in the room, because for a conservative member of Congress, that'll create trust. Because I'm sorry, but conservatives talk in a way that other conservatives can hear. I've heard many liberals try to talk like conservatives, and God bless them for trying, but there's nothing like a conservative to talk like a conservative and get that trust. And the second thing is you get belief from progressive members of Congress. They don't believe that Republicans will ever step up on climate. So if you have a conservative in that meeting that says, I'm following this issue, and there are many people, many conservatives, many Republicans that want action.
Okay, thank you. So Jacob, why don't you get in, and then we'll have a kind of free-form conversation. I know you've thought about this a lot.
So two points I guess I'll pull off. First was sort of Steve's point of sort of the fiscal conservatism, what's fiscally responsible and actually possible in terms of addressing climate change. I think CCL's framework is so because it is revenue neutral. So I think that's a big thing. And the second one, kind of going off Ron's point, was a sense of realism of what's actually sellable to the American people. What can we get done in a constructive timeline and actually work to achieve, and what can we work with the international community as well to do. So those are sort of the 2 points that I fed off of.
And then Bill, can I jump back in?
Yeah, let's go for it.
So, I mean, just kind of what I'm hearing, some nuggets in all the statements, right, is I do think a conservative perspective respects market mechanisms within the country. I mean, and that's a very powerful force for good if harnessed the right way. And entrepreneurial innovation is a force for good when harnessed in the right way. And I know there's a lot of other facets we can talk about it, but I do think that the CCL, from my conservative perspective, right, that's what speaks so strongly about the CCL approach, right? That this is market driven. It capitalizes on things that, you know, a conservative would really resonate with in terms of our economic systems and things like that. So if you've connected on values, right, I mean, this is an approach that fits very well to a conservative mindset. And that's a good thing. I mean, I think that's a good thing for the conservative perspective to bring. And I think that's also an interface or an intersection between the CCL approach to thing and a conservative, just a pure conservative perspective on things.
Well, I like to say one thing that I saw that the CCL proposing is about the CO2 dividend. Is that right? Initially I thought, whoa, what a great idea. But then I start doing my critique mentally, and I said, doesn't that mean a tax increase? And then my questions came. My questions were, well, how much tax? And who monitors that? Is it the government? And then my past experience about government is not, government does some great things, but is it going to be local? Is it going to be national? And what perspective is the whole world? Where does the whole world fit in this? Is it just going to be the United States doing this? So I have more questions. It sounds like a novel idea, but we poured a lot of money into solar. We poured a lot of money into wind. We put $50 billion or so. It only produces a small amount. And I propose to take that 50 from there and put it into what that one guy who discovered the genealogy, he proposed about algae, growing algae, and then harvesting that, and it has a negative CO2. I mean, that's what I'm talking about research. Find one item that fill up these cars, fossil fuel, because it seems like that dividend is going to hurt low-income people because they have to get to work. They have to do. I mean, who's going to pay for it? That's my only thought about it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So consider yourselves a small discussion group now. And feel free to build on what each other said, take it in a different direction, however you like to go.
Well, I'll hop in real quick. I think sort of going off Ron's point about looking at this in a global framework, the reason I like CCL's bill so much was because being in Republican meetings, interning in Republican offices, one of the biggest critiques you'll hear regarding climate change is if India and China aren't doing anything about it, then why should we? But with the border adjustment on this bill, which impairs costs on people importing or countries importing goods into our country, I think that sort of in a way forces them to do so. You already see other countries doing this. The European Union is looking to do this, Canada as well. So I think this can be a valuable tool in actually getting those quote unquote bad actors to adjust their behavior, because there are inherent costs to them not doing so in a way that maybe an international framework from the UN couldn't do, because they just don't have necessarily the power to do so.
Well, and also Jacob, and it also defines the millions of decisions that would have to be made to actually implement something like that to the mechanisms of the market, right? I mean, which when it's working, works extremely well to do that, right? It is not empowering a bureaucratic outgrowth of government to do that, right? And so from a conservative perspective, again, that is a way of really kind of driving a key driver into the environment, right, with not enabling some huge bureaucracy to do it that's unaccountable, really, right? So the market, I think, is best positioned to do that from a conservative point of view, and that's why it intersects so well, I think, with the CCL approach on something like that, right? So if we're listening to one another, right, when a CCLer is talking to a conservative representative or something like that, if we're listening and connecting on values, that should be a discussion you can have, right, that could have real impact.
That makes me think, Elizabeth, of what you said about the advantages of having a conservative in the room for the conversations. You referred to language. I'm just thinking about it, how hard it is for anybody who is not a conservative to speak fluently, okay, like a native speaker. Mm-hmm. Same thing would be for liberals, conservative liberals. So, So could you say more about that, and maybe connected with what we're hearing here about what's the kind of the sensibility, what's the language, what are the words? What's the intuitions that are important for conservatives to be part of these conversations?
Yeah, it's subtle, I would say, and it's complex. And I think someone who's brought up conservative or just has those values and sort of has settled in that for a long time has some sort of natural inclinations. We, for instance, are not, I think, inclined to quickly correct a member of Congress. there's that inbred, I would say, that respect for authority that comes with conservatism, like listening. Maybe it's something I don't understand. Maybe I have a good reason for doing that. I'm remembering a member of Congress that we met with a lobby meeting. It was Rick Knight, a conservative that was later, it's Purple District. But we asked him, well, what are you doing how do you feel about climate change and renewable energy? And he said, the staff member said, like, we'd rather not talk about this, but we'd rather have you look at what we're doing. And they had an incredible number of wind turbines there. That district was really well known for wind turbines. It made economic sense. He wasn't doing it for the political reasons. And then my spidey senses told me that in the Republican Party, it wasn't popular to talk about climate change. So, and that's very unfortunate that the Democratic Party seems to own climate change, own environmentalism, and Republicans are outside of it. And it's, quote, all Republicans are against the environment, it seems. So, yeah, having a Republican in the room, I think, can set a tone and read the room in a way that would calm maybe the progressives, because they only see opposition instead of, they might see a real effort, but also a little bit of some barriers that others don't have.
Well, it makes me think of the one of the things we do with Braver Angels workshops is to invite self-criticism. So what you said, Elizabeth, gets me to think about that. I don't know if anybody in the panel would like to address what are some of the blind spots or downsides of how many Republicans and conservatives have approached this. People who wouldn't be on the screen here today. Okay, what do you see as some of the blind spots or limitations or downsides?
I mean, I'll jump in for one. I mean, I do think conservative, your greatest strength is your greatest weakness, right? I mean, I think conservatives want to conserve that which they see as best in the system and all of that. And oftentimes that means they're a little hesitant to move too fast, right? All that kind of stuff. And so we tend to be slow. I mean, or we could resist change. Oftentimes you're resisting change, right? But just if I could turn that just one slightly, right? I also think that when you're talking to a conservative, right, especially an elected representative, I would keep separate what this person has got to do to get elected, because there's a lot of things in the political system that are crazy, right? And being primaried from the right is a huge problem in a conservative representatives ward, right? But I bet a large number of them will connect on values, right? The stewardship of the earth, right? Protecting protecting what's good in the country. And there's a lot of people that really think, the land, the environment, and all that kind of stuff is good, separate from how do I get elected again? So just be sensitive to that. I mean, that's the value discussion compared to the electability discussion, with an attitude of, well, wait a minute, I'm conservative. I want to see incremental change. I want to talk about these things. Don't confuse that dialogue with we're not aligned on values, is what I would say.
I'd like to say something on that as well, because any type of difficulty we have in America, we become tribal. We get in our little echo chambers and we wait in the bushes to see what words are said, and we jump on the words and we dissect the words to how we think my side should be, and a lot of times it becomes negative. Sometimes it's correct about us Republicans, and sometimes it isn't. And I agree with Elizabeth. We have got to learn how to communicate to the other side, because we might say we believe in constitutional law. And then it's like, well, what the heck does that mean? Well, we believe in justice. What does that mean? Well, you have a Democrat would come back and say, well, I want everything for the marginalized. And it's covering those two things that I just said. See, so we got to learn how to communicate, because I, as a Black American, love America. Okay? I'm going to tell you that straight out. And I believe there's problems with climate change. But I haven't been convinced to what degree, because I don't hear the conservative side of science. And when I do hear the side about climate change, it's about spending, and coming up with a solution. And I've never seen a solution solved in 5 minutes or in a TV commercial. So that's, that's.
Jacob, blind spots, downsides?
Sure. So I definitely recognize all the points people have made. For me, it's definitely been the incremental approach can be frustrating sometimes with Republicans, let's say elected officials more specifically, wanting to see bigger change come about. And I think it's because we've been so sort of slow to get to the table on this that it's been frustrating to not see as many innovative solutions that we could. And I think because of that, again, the left has a lot of different solutions that I don't necessarily agree with. So I'd like to see Republicans come to the table with a lot more. We're starting to get there with the House of Representatives, Republicans in there getting their own climate agenda set. So I think just the incremental approach has definitely been a bit frustrating for me.
Anything you wanted to add on that, Elizabeth?
Well, what floated through my mind is I believe it's New York State that's experiencing ranked choice voting right now, which I find fascinating. I don't understand it completely, but the idea of so I think that both the Republican and the Democratic Party is full of people with different visions and different ideas about how policy or vision can practically work. And so who to vote for becomes the big question. And yeah, I love this discussion. We need more discussion. And to plug Braver Angels, it's amazing to provide this platform to work some of these issues out, be heard and hear.
And I just want to plug Ron in that I love America too. I'm not a Black American, or anything like that. I have a different life experience than Ron, right? But I will bet the vast majority of conservatives that any liberal talks to loves their country, right? And there are values underneath that. We are going to disagree on solutions, but disagreeing on solutions doesn't mean there's no common ground. It doesn't mean there's not a place we could start. So start and then build upon that, right? And I think back to what Elizabeth said, having the dialogue can be transformative, but you got to have a dialogue, right? I listen to what you say, you listen to what I say, we talk back and forth, right? It's not scoring points, that kind of stuff. And I think in some ways, because it's so emotional now in the political landscape, from my perspective with Braver Angels, I'm seeing more and more people now that are coming to say, wait, we can't keep going this way. We can't keep going in this war about who's going to win, right? We're going to win when we come together and talk and find common ground, and let's do that. We can all agree on that. Let's do it. And then we build on top of that. And then quicker than I think most people think, you can get to a really transformative situation, but you're getting there on very discrete, well-defined incremental steps. And that's what I think is, because I'm a long-term optimist on this, and I think that is a direction that I can see as a conservative. That is something that I have seen work in other situations. Climate's a much bigger problem, I'll agree to that. Right, but I've seen that approach work in other scenarios, and I'm an optimistic viewpoint that can happen here. Well,
I think that's a really good way to begin to close our part of the conversation. I think I want to say that to Beth and Bruce, who are harvesting, curating the questions, that I think it would be good to open this up for the dialogue, this panel and participants, particularly since Steve just gave a rousing, we can do this. You almost sounded like Barack Obama. Yes, we can, Steve, but I know that was the wrong analogy here. Okay.
It's okay. It's okay. I think he was a very cool dude.
Yeah. And before we finish all this, Elizabeth, I have to go back to your float in the parade. It's such a story of experiencing hostility, right?
Yeah.
And you know what Steve was talking about, can we move past the hostility to actually talk together about our planet? And it's survival and it's flourishing. So that's really that's what we have to do.
Yeah.
So Beth and Bruce, you got some stuff for our panel here?
Yes, we do, Bill. I'm going to start by noting that a lot of the questions really suggest that the conservative caucus can provide a lot of good information about tactics for talking to members of Congress. That's what we specialize in, is tactical questions. On the bigger question of conservatives in general, we've got several questions that ask essentially, what is the difference between a conservative and a Republican? Do you see them as identical or not? And one of the questions actually mentioned Frederick Douglass as someone who probably, would he still align with the Republican Party today? So this is kind of going back to being a conservative and whether that's, you know, so if the panel would like to try that one.
Well, I think Frederick Douglass would align. He would have a hard time because the way things are so tribal, but he would continue on with his dialogue. Remember, he supported women's rights. He was on a ballot with a woman to run for president, and so he was at I think what we call the Seneca convention for that particular woman. So yes, he would, and he probably would resonate, and I'm sure Democrats would vote for him because he would speak to the narrative of helping everyone and not have a closed mind. So yeah, I could.
Okay, anyone else? Ron's got that wrapped up.
Well, I guess, Bruce, it's a difficult thing in that, so I'm a conservative and I tend to vote Republican, but not always, not 100% of the time. But what other choices do I only have a couple of choices. So I think we overweight sometimes the fact that, we have two choices. You're going to vote for one or the other or not vote. And I refuse to not vote. I'm going to vote, right? Because that's the way you have impact, right? So I think sometimes we overweight exactly the voting thing versus where our values are coming from. And to get to that value discussion, you have to be careful of the labels, right? So like in Braver Angels, we don't call people Republicans and Democrats and things like that. We say they lean red, they tend towards conservatism, or they lean blue, tend towards liberalism. And many of the people in my local chapter, we call them alliances, will say things like, I'm blue with red spots on, or I'm red with blue spots, and things like that. It's when you have that dialogue, when you connect, and I guarantee you, I've been with very, very different people in lots of different occasions, and there has yet to be a time where I didn't connect if we use general respect in that dialogue and we listen to understand rather than reload and immediately come back on things. So common ground is there. There is no doubt in my mind about that, but you got to be careful of labeling and things like that when you're having the dialogue for value, as distinct from which lever in the big honking voting booth, would I have pulled if I was with my mother. So, so there you go. That's my 2 cents.
I'm trying to articulate this in a few sentences, but the Republican Party is going through a schism right now, right? They really are trying to, I think, position to have a party in the next 5 years, to have a group. I feel as though if we could stop campaigning, I have particular respect for somebody who's running for office that has been a mayor or a governor because they've had to solve problems. And so you could stay in this sort of this abstract idea of what a problem is.
The question is, what is it that liberals are doing that you don't understand as a conservative?
What liberals are doing that I can't understand. Well, that I can't understand, that I don't agree with. One is that Trump is still a part of the headline sort of attention-getting thing. When I think many conservatives and Republicans are just trying to solve some problems, I find it interesting that the immigration issue and the border issue remains a problem because it's a practical problem in our economy and in our culture right now that affects people's real, their jobs prospects, their incomes. And so while there was positioning on the Democrats that they were going to open up the border, that things were going to be very different after Trump, that Trump is everything that Trump did was wrong. But then that when it turned over, it's complicated, right? Thanks, Jacob, I'd like to have you follow up. I'm sure.
Oh, sure, absolutely. So I guess going back to the first question, I didn't realize we had moved on, but in terms of are all Republicans conservatives? Not yes and no. I mean, because even in conservatism, there's fiscal conservatism and social conservatism, which was kind of brought together by Ronald Reagan. But prior to that, you still had Republicans who were fiscally conservative, but more socially liberal. So all those dichotomies still exist in the party today. If you have a big group of Republicans together and talk to them, you're still going to have those differences. So it's not just I'm a conservative and that encompasses all of that. So it is more complicated than that. In terms of, I think second question was, are there things that liberals do that still sort of confuse you? Yes and no. I mean, again, it's all just policy differences that I would have, not in terms of necessarily your social values per se. It's just, I think we just have policy differences and there's common ground in all of those. Again, I'm not going to go down the list of policy topics right now, but again, I think it's just certain policy things that we have disagreements on, and that's fair. And I think these discussions help with that.
Thank you, guys.
I like to.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah. Okay. Steve,
Ron, I think we're going to go on. I just want to make sure we get to. We have a bunch of questions in the chat. So
okay.
I think what we're going to do from now on is we'll address it to one person, and then we'll just try to get through some of these questions. And thank you all for putting your questions in. So a really popular upvoted one was, I hear from Republicans that a carbon tax, now this isn't CCL Republicans, let's say Republicans in general. I hear from Republicans that a carbon tax is a non-starter as they are against increasing taxes. Are Republicans discussing any other ways of curbing fossil fuel usage? Or you could also try to help us understand how you might help a Republican who's concerned about increasing taxes come on board with carbon fee and dividend. And I'm going to ask Jacob to address that one.
Sure. So in terms of other solutions that I hear, there's several other Republican groups that look at things like tax incentives, investing in R&D, things of that sort. That's sort of the most common thing you're going to hear. Being big on nuclear energy, investing in that. So just a lot of different investments and tax incentives. In terms of selling carbon pricing, House leadership can be a bit disingenuous when they talk about carbon tax. They usually just talk about a straight carbon tax, which is regressive and would be bad for lower to middle income people. But that's not what CCL is selling. It's obviously a carbon dividend that would actually help lower income revenue people a lot. So I think the biggest selling point I would have is, again, it's revenue neutral. I don't want a policy that's going to cause us to spend more money than we're taking in. It's revenue neutral, or it's going to increase revenue just because it's a good policy. So that's sort of one selling point that I think I would have. And again, going back to my earlier point about sort of getting the international community in line, this does that as well.
Thank you.
And Beth, I have if I could quickly, the question reminded me of, it feels like a gotcha question. And I know I've walked into Republican offices, and it's like, oh, I've got a gotcha question. What's your position on this? And that's just not the approach that's going to win over Republicans. We want to be a trusted ally, and so softening that message a little bit to say, hey, what do you think about climate change, or climate change is this thing? can we be a trusted ally and show you some of the policy that's out there and what people are talking about and how this is affecting your, possibly affecting your constituents, and then stopping and listening, and then providing information as they're ready for it, as they were, being that trusted ally, I think.
That's a great point. Thank you, Elizabeth. Bruce, do you want to ask the next question?
Sure. This one was upvoted quite a bit too, and it was, what is it? And Steve, I'd like you to answer this one since you've been quiet for a couple minutes.
An unusual thing, right? Okay.
Yeah. What are some things that you're frustrated that liberals and progressives do not understand?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if they understand it or not, right? I mean, I think, and we've kind of touched on it in several different ways. I get frustrated when we're trying to have a dialogue, to listen, to understand on both sides, and we do it either in a rushed environment or like what Elizabeth said, when the first question is a gotcha question, right? Because I think like conservatives are like, I worry about getting ambushed, right? And I'm sure other people do as well, right? So the thing that I would react to is, like, I was in East Berlin in November of 1989 at the fall of the Berlin Wall, right? I mean, I was in Venezuela before the current, Chavez government took over and things like that. I mean, in Cambodia, I heard about, our guide told us about how his brother had been shot in the head because he took a mango off the tree in their front yard, and it was the people's mango, right? So granting government large amounts of power with nothing but good intentions, and all of these events, all of my experience were, large government bureaucracies trying to do a really good thing, make society better. But the batting average here is not very good compared to the batting average of incremental change, right? So probably personally, Bruce, the thing that really kind of frustrates me is, can we just kind of dial it down a little bit? Let's all agree we love our country, we love the earth, we want a decent planet to give to our grandchildren. That's where we're going on this thing. So can we just dial it down and talk a little bit about, how do we give the best planet we can to our grandchildren, right? I mean, and that's a very fruitful discussion. And I think when we begin with, we've got to have this transformational change next week, or we're all dead in 14 years. And I've heard that in workshops in Braver Angels. Someone refused to fill out their action plan because all humans would be dead in 14 years. And I just don't believe that, right? I mean, so let's have that dialogue, right? And let's not jump to the conclusion or try to get one another to win points. And I'm not saying everybody does that. I'm just saying it can sound that way sometimes. So let's have the talk, because I know we're going to find things we can agree on if we're focused on values.
Very cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Beth?
I wanted to ask, actually, Elizabeth, you can answer either one of this. How can conservatives work productively with liberals to shape policy in the current political environment? Or how can liberals work productively with conservatives to shape policy in the current political environment? Your choice.
And I'm assuming you're talking about the Deutsche Bill's HR 2307. I was reminded, I think it was by something Steve said, but we had a speaker at one of our Saturday meetings, our international meetings, years ago now, that I remember it to this day, and an African-American woman who talked about our differences, our stresses between us, and she said, no matter what happens, no matter where the talk goes, say, I will not let this separate us. I will not let this divide us. And so it's kind of like giving some space, giving some room, staying. Not leaving, staying. And so making space for each other. And I guess, given a pass, my parents have been married for 60 years. They're experiencing their 60th anniversary this year, and they've given themselves a lot of passes, right? And they stay in the room. They stay. And so I guess I'd just say, let's just stay together and make room for each other. We do need to, this organization, I would say, needs to make special effort to make conservatives and Republicans feel welcome.
That's wonderful. Hey, Ron, do you want to take a crack at that too? What would you like liberals to do to help you move forward on specific issues?
Give me voice. Give me understanding. Don't listen to the media and those quick fix politicians on both sides, because trust has been broken. So no matter what we as panelists, or matter what your views on climate change, if you don't hear us, you won't believe us. We are concerned. There's no quick fix in this. There's numerous books on the other side. I've read them. I read the recent book by the guy from Sweden. I think his name is Björn Ljungberg, and he wrote a book called False Alarm. You should read that. I mean, he sounds like he's a liberal, and I read it, and I was like, oh, he makes a lot of sense. Is it that alarming? And if it is, then we need to get the world together and try to solve it. You know, I hear, but then it comes out that we don't believe that it is a problem. Yeah, you're going to have that percentage of people in both parties share different views. You know, they're deniers. I know that. I talk to them all the time. I listen to them in the brave angel fashion. I said, well, why do you think that way? Why don't you ask more Republicans that? Why do you think that way? Instead of attacking because, you know, we don't communicate very well. So yeah, that you know, I read that book thoroughly, and I said, oh my goodness, you know, Ron, you need to change some of your stance. I'm not going to change everything. I am a fiscal conservative first, and I am mad because the Republicans are spending just as much money as the Democrats. But what can I do? All I can do is write to my senator and representative, and they turn the mic off, so to speak. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. I could go on and on and on.
Thank you, Ron. That was really helpful. Steve.
Just a quick one, Beth, right? I mean, another thing I would suggest, and this is kind of a ground rule in Braver Angels, it works really well for us, is grant good intention first, right? I mean, grant the fact that whoever you're talking to, even though they're on a completely different side than you, are really trying to solve a problem. Now, you're going to differ on solution and all that. And also some are just trying to make points, right? I mean, but until proven otherwise, grant good intention. Grant that someone's really trying to do this, but they're doing it in their way, and they don't know about your way yet. And then have that dialogue of listening, et cetera, to establish trust. But that's in my experience, that's a very productive way to begin bridging differences on things that in other ways of approaching the conversation could almost seem unbridgeable, unsurmountable, right? But that in my life has worked really well.
Awesome. Thank you for all of that. Bruce, do you have another question?
I do. I have one that I think Jacob should probably handle this one. And that is, what's keeping conservatives from being engaged in the climate change conversation and maybe even bringing their own solutions?
Well, I think I would kind of reject the basis of the question because they are bringing their own solutions. It may not be where you want it to be, but they are. If you look at the House Innovation Agenda that just came out, it's a long list of pieces of legislation. I think it's over 30 that work to address climate change through innovation and things of that sort. In terms of carbon pricing, I just think there's still, it's just still a sticky point for House Republicans. I'd say it's less so for Senate Republicans. And, you know, there's young people and groups all over the country that are conservative based that are bringing great solutions to the table and engaging on this subject specifically. So 2 or 3 years ago, I would have agreed with your question. I think there was still some hesitation, but not in all the work I've seen and I've done in terms of getting Republicans to the table.
All right, thank you. Beth, do you have a question by any chance?
Sure.
And this will probably be our last question.
Yeah.
We're close to it.
Well, I think I'm looking through the Q&A, and I think most of the themes have been addressed. So Bill, do you think this might be a good time to just ask the panelists to maybe make one or two statements about what they've heard? What do you think?
Sure. Fine. It doesn't have to be profound here, guys, though, right? This wasn't on the original plan, but just as we wrap up here, any kind of final message, knowing that the goal here was for CCL members to have a better sense of where conservatives come from in their lives and what and their thinking, and then particularly around climate change. So just any, a minute or so, if anybody'd like to just wrap up and with a final word.
And then you guys don't go away, because after they speak, we have a couple of other surprises, including Madeline Perez's comments. But please go ahead, panel.
Oh, surprises here. Okay. So let's go in reverse order of how we started. So Jacob, and then Elizabeth, and then Ron and Steve.
Final word. So again, thank you so much for everyone for being here, and I really appreciate all the perspectives. I think kind of what I've taken away from today is that there are some common themes that when you're engaging with conservatives, fiscal conservatism, carbon pricing, I think could be a good message as well. Of these are things that you can, go to conservatives and talk about. Asking more questions than actually speaking, I think, is another common theme, and something that I think everyone here would agree on. And just, listening, again, just listening more than you talk. So I think that's the biggest thing that I take out of this.
Okay, Elizabeth.
When I first joined this organization, I remember it was Madeline Para, I believe, that talked about this organization being transformative. And that's the first time I'd heard of the difference. There's transactional, send your donation today, or transformative, and that CCL was transformative. And this discussion shows, again, in action, that we can transform our understanding. All I would say, a note to everybody, everywhere, would be there's Kool-Aid everywhere. It's very difficult not to drink the Kool-Aid. It's very difficult not to repeat the talking points, to hear things a number of times and then start speaking that way, and to lose our independence of a viewpoint. And so just to center ourselves and be independent.
Climate change for me it's been inspiring today. I mean, the topic has been, it's going to force me as a Republican that usually focuses on other policies more than climate change to dig deeper and have more dialogue with my liberal friends, my neighbor especially. If you knew how we spoke to one another, you would chuckle. But I would say, first of all, I supported venture capital, but I know as investing, I learned a long time, well, I'll rephrase this. I'll say this. The first question when I was a kid that was told to me, what's the greatest invention in the world? Compound interest. I'll give you guys the answer. Okay, that's what they said to me. And I thought, wow, what a transforming question. That is why I would think venture capital would be one, but then they want their money in 5 years. So now I reevaluated. We need government to put the big bulk of money up first and dramatically ramp up investments in green energy research. But like Elizabeth, like we all are saying, all the talking heads are giving us this information that we're going to die tomorrow. I mean, answer that question. Do we have time? Do we have 30 years? Do we have 40 years? Or is it 1 year, 5 years? I don't hear that. And that's what a person like me that haven't done their research is starting other issues with. And I get in my tribal tunnel and I don't hear you. And I think you're lying to me because you're trying to make money. That's all I say.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Steve, take us home.
Again, thanks for inviting me. I've certainly enjoyed the dialogue we've had today and all that, and I thought it was extremely well organized, all that. And maybe with the exception of me, my hope is that you've seen that some rational, reasonable people have, conservative, leaning red kind of things, and I think that's a journey of, and hopefully that's a positive thing for many people in the audience. And And I'll close with one of my favorite quotes, which is not a conservative quote, it's not a liberal quote, it's whatever. It's the guy that wrote the 1 Minute Manager, a fabulous book, the old book, fabulous book. But the quote is, none of us is as smart as all of us. And so the more people we get, aligned on values and working through solutions, starting with common ground, the better it's going to be for everybody. And that's why I'm part of CCL. That's why I'm part of Braver Angels. And that's why I was happy to participate today.
Okay. Wow, everybody. I don't think I have any surprises for you, contrary to my advanced billing, but I am just incredibly delighted with the conversation that's happened here. I think it's essential to CCL's work. And I'm really, really grateful to our panelists, to Jacob, Ron, Elizabeth, and Steve, and also to Bill and Beth and Bruce for the moderating of this event. I think panelists that you engaged us and each other with great thoughtfulness and integrity and courage, so thank you. In our polarized politics, people often prefer to keep quiet, but avoidance of the conversation and our struggle to have these conversations across party lines, that is part of the problem. So according to the Pew Research Center, the registered voters of this country are nearly evenly split between Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And as you know, our Congress is pretty close to evenly split between the two parties too. So the people that you disagree with or we disagree with, whichever way you lean politically, they aren't going to go away. Legislative successes are hard to come by and hard to hang on to if they're supported by only one party, as we're seeing in the news lately. And so that's why we're here in CCL. CCL's played the long and difficult game of bringing people together across political lines on climate solutions, and that is arduous work. So we know the climate issue is politically charged, and that impacts who gets involved in it. The climate movement as a whole is not evenly distributed the way Congress and the registered voters of this country are. And in both the climate movement and our organizations, there are many more voices that lean to the left than lean right. Looking at CCL, we were able to match more than half of our supporter list with a voter file about a year and a half ago. And it showed that 68% of our supporters tend to vote Democrat compared to 6% Republican. And the remainder are unidentified or unknown. So we designed this session today primarily to lift up the minority political voices, those on the right, and to assist the majority voices on the left to expand their understanding and perhaps notice some biases that might have crept into their minds. We offered a different workshop to help address ways in which our organization doesn't reflect the racial and ethnic makeup of our country. That one was called A Lens into Race and Climate, that also took place today. Okay, so to solve the climate problem, we need real solutions that work. And policies work out best when they're examined from many angles in order to root out the things that aren't well formed in them. And some of our panelists have stories of policies that weren't well thought out or experiences of the government that weren't well thought out. I remember back to CCL when we thought that returning the income from the carbon fee to households would be easy and negligible in cost. But we got so many questions about it, especially from Republican congressional offices, expressing skepticism that the dividend return would be administered well, that CCL went out and found an expert in the field to study the issue. And we learned a whole lot of new information as a result that we could incorporate and build into the plan. So the solution was improved by Republican scrutiny. Okay, one of my hopes for the session today is that listeners who lean left would just hear something from a panelist that would make you stop and think, or that you would feel sympathy for an experience that you heard from a panelist. I know for myself, those early the stories in the beginning about needing to be frugal growing up and having to look to yourself and be self-reliant, those resonate with me. I happen to go in the direction the government should help people, good stewards of the economy. That would be another way to think of fiscal conservatism, as well as good stewards of the environment. Okay, so In addition to improving the solution, I've heard over and over from CCL volunteers that they've become better listeners and better people from being challenged to work with people that we disagree with. In the early days of CCL, we used to say that we've got one rule. You can't meet with a member of Congress unless you can do it from a place of respect, gratitude, and appreciation for their public service. Our volunteers expanded this over time to become one of the core values of the organization, appreciating and respecting everybody, not just Congress. It wasn't easy when we started. It's still not easy, but it is a thing that most of us appreciate deeply about CCL. So in our last minutes, if you would like to take just a moment and think about the panelists, there's been a really lively debate going on at times in the chat and in the Q&A, and that's good. We can do that, people. But let's put that aside, and if you would like to put an appreciation of one or all of the panelists into the chat, I think that would be a great way for us to end and something you can carry forward into your future conversations. And now I'm going to turn it over to Beth.
Thank you, Madeline. That was great. And I am just going to wrap us up in the final minutes in terms of what you can do as a next step. I am the Blue co-chair of the Braver Angels Action Team, and I was super inspired by today. And here are just some things you can do. Bruce put a bunch of links in the chat, so you have lots of things. One is you can join the Conservative Caucus as a red member or a blue friend. You can join our Braver Angels Action Team and community. We welcome reds and blues, and as Steve Saltwick said, even if you're spotted blue and a red, or spotted red or a blue, or you're purple, you're welcome too. You can read what the other side reads to get out of your media bubble. The media came up quite a bit today. Thanks, Ron and others for bringing that up. We have a reading list that we've put together in the chat. And then you can also attend a Braver Angels workshop. And I just want to take a moment. In the chat, we have Braver Angels workshops. I'm just letting this load. And there's some really cool workshops. Some of them were designed just for CCL. We modified them from standard Braver Angels workshops. They're run by CCL. They're organized by CCL. That includes Depolarizing Within, where you learn to be less judgmental and polarized, and Bridging the Divide on Climate Solutions, where you talk constructively with the other side, whether you're red, blue, purple, whatever. And then if you want to go beyond those CCL ones, we have Braver Angels Red Blue workshops. This is how I got started. They're small workshops with about 8 reds and 8 blues, so 8 conservatives, 8 liberals, talking together to build mutual understanding through interactive exercises that help us see the humanity in each other. We explore stereotypes, we listen to each other in fishbowls to really understand deeply the other side. We ask questions of the other side. We work together to figure out how we can contribute to finding common ground. You can also do a one-on-one conversation in Braver Angels. We have templates for that on our website. And you can see Bruce and I doing one. He's a red wearing blue. I'm a blue wearing red, and we're smiling. So we're having a great time, and so can you. And on that note, Madeline's already done a great job thanking everyone. So I'm just going to say thank you all for being here today, taking the time out of your afternoon. And I'm going to close on 2 quotes on civility, which I think really fit the values of CCL. To be balanced, one is from a Republican and one is from a Democrat. So the Republican is Ronald Reagan, who said we must, in one of his presidential addresses, cooperate in a common service. I may be a Republican president, but I need the help of Republicans and Democrats if we are going to solve the serious problems confronting our nation. Those are wise words, right? To encourage us to row together as CCLers in the same direction to solve climate change. And then the Democrat is John F. Kennedy, who said, civility is not a sign of weakness. Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us instead never fear to negotiate. Let both sides explore what problems unite us instead of belaboring those problems which divide us. So I think our panel has done a fantastic job today. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Madeline. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, Bruce, for just really participating in so many wonderful ways today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference and you'll continue your involvement in civility and Braver Angels. Thank you.